The day she told me she wanted a divorce, I still had the hospital wristband on. I hadn't even taken it off since her last treatment. My wife, Melissa, had just survived stage 4 cancer. We'd spent 11 months in and out of hospitals, selling everything we owned to pay for her treatment. The house, my car, my tools, even my wedding ring. I remember watching the auctioneer's gavel fall on our home and thinking, at least she'll live. She lived. And the first thing she did after her final checkup was file for divorce. Her exact words? "I want a real man now." She said it with a little laugh, like a joke she'd been saving for the perfect moment. She took half of what little I had left, the small savings I'd scraped together, in full custody of our kids. I didn't fight it. I couldn't. I was too tired, too empty. That night, I checked into a cheap roadside motel just outside of town. Room 6. Smelled like bleach and loneliness. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how someone you'd nearly died for could treat you like a stranger. My name's Ethan Cole, 38 years old. Mechanic. Father of 2. Or at least I used to be. I hadn't seen my kids in 3 weeks. My lawyer said custody battles take time. I didn't have time. I didn't have much of anything. I was about to drift off when I heard it, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate hits against the door. Not loud, but heavy enough to pull me back from the edge of sleep. I opened it, expecting maybe the motel manager or some drunk guest. Instead, a man stood there, mid-50s, wearing a long coat, face shadowed by the flickering hallway light. He said my name before I could ask what he wanted. "Ethan Cole," he said quietly, like he'd been looking for me. "You don't know me, but I knew your wife." I froze. He looked at me with that kind of calm people have when they're about to drop a truth you can't unhear. Then he said, "She wasn't sick when she met me." The hallway light buzzed overhead, and for the first time in months, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt the first spark of suspicion. For a second, I just stared at him. The hum of the flickering hallway light filled the silence between us. I asked who he was, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied my face like he was trying to measure how much truth I could handle. Then he said, "My name's Dr. Harrison. I worked at the clinic where your wife had her treatments." I felt my stomach tighten. He looked exhausted. Pale skin, dark circles, eyes that carried the kind of guilt people don't shake off easily. I asked him what he meant when he said she wasn't sick. He said quietly, "I can't explain everything here, but you deserve to know what you really paid for." He handed me a manila envelope, sealed with tape. "Don't open it now," he said. "Not here." Then he turned to leave. I called after him, but he didn't stop. Just before he stepped out into the rain, he said one last thing. "She lied to all of us, Ethan, and you weren't her first." I shut the door, hands trembling. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it, debating whether to open it. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I thought about Melissa, how she'd cried when I sold the house, how she'd thanked me for saving her, how she'd promised we'd start over once she recovered. Every memory now felt staged, rehearsed. Around 3 a.m., I finally broke the seal. Inside were photocopies of medical records, lab results, scans, doctor's notes. Except her name wasn't Melissa Cole. It was Melissa Crane. Same date of birth. Same photo attached to the file. But the diagnosis line was blank. The scans showed nothing. Perfectly healthy. There was one more page, a billing ledger with signatures. My name. My payments. Every check I'd written to the clinic, every dollar drained from my life. And at the bottom, a note scrawled in pen. Transferred to private account. M. Crane. That night, sitting in a motel room that smelled of bleach and regret, I realized the truth was bigger than betrayal. It wasn't just that she'd left me. It was that I'd been financing a lie, and someone had helped her build it. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring at those papers, watching the foundation of my life crumble line by line. Her signature was on everything: the hospital intake forms, the transfers, even the false treatment invoices. Each document was like a punch I didn't see coming. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I was done being the man who reacted. From that moment on, I would move like a man who planned. At 8 in the morning, I drove to the clinic where she'd supposedly been treated. The receptionist recognized her photo immediately, but hesitated when I asked to see Dr. Harrison. After a minute, she said he'd been on leave for weeks, the kind of leave people take when they've said too much. I showed her the file he'd given me. She glanced at it, paled, then excused herself. When she came back, her tone had changed. She said their legal department would contact me if I had questions. That was my answer. They knew. I left before security could show up. Sitting in my car, I called Melissa for the first time in weeks. She didn't answer, of course, but I didn't hang up right away. I let it ring just to hear her voicemail, the voice I used to wake up to, the voice that now sounded foreign. "Hi, it's Melissa. Leave a message." I did. I said, "They know?" "I know. And soon, everyone will." Then I ended the call. For the next few days, I worked quietly. I copied every document, every transaction record, and started tracing the accounts listed in the ledger. Most were closed, but one name kept appearing: Galen Trust, a private medical investment firm registered in another state. The same firm that had funded the clinic's experimental research program. The one Melissa supposedly volunteered for. She hadn't been a patient. She'd been a participant. Or worse, a partner. By the fifth night, I was sitting in my truck outside the gated community where she now lived with her new real man. My hands didn't shake anymore. I wasn't there for revenge. I was there for clarity. When the lights in her house went off, I started my engine and whispered the same words I'd written on every document I'd uncovered. Follow the money. I spent the next week moving in shadows. Every spare hour was spent tracking the trail that started with Galen Trust. It led through shell accounts, offshore wires, and fake medical subsidiaries that all circled back to one place: Hollingsworth Medical Research, a company Melissa had briefly consulted for during her so-called treatments. The deeper I dug, the more the pattern came into focus. Her cancer story hadn't been a tragedy. It had been an investment. The clinic wasn't treating patients. It was laundering research grants through false oncology cases. And Melissa had been the perfect face for it. Young, sympathetic, photogenic. A survivor the investors could rally behind while the real money disappeared in private accounts. And I had been the front. The loyal husband, draining every resource to save her, making it all look real. I didn't need proof anymore. I needed a plan. On the third night of my search, I drove to Dr. Harrison's apartment. It was dark, blinds drawn, mailbox overflowing. I picked the lock, not out of malice, but necessity. Inside, the air smelled of dust and medication. His desk was a mess of files and burned documents. But in the corner of the room, half hidden under a stack of folders, I found something he hadn't destroyed: a flash drive, labeled in faded ink, Crane Protocol. I didn't open it there. I took it back to the motel, plugged it in, and waited. What came up wasn't a spreadsheet or research data. It was video, dozens of short clips. Melissa in hospital gowns, speaking calmly to a camera, talking about progress, recovery, and test results, all staged. In one clip, she laughed between takes. And then came a file labeled Session 9. In it, Harrison's voice could be heard asking her if she felt guilty. She smiled at the camera, that same rehearsed smile I'd fallen in love with years ago. "Guilt's for people who lose," she said. "I'm just trying to survive better than the rest." I sat there for a long time, the screen still glowing. My hands didn't move. My breathing slowed. That was the moment something inside me hardened. Not rage, not grief, just the quiet certainty of a man who'd finally seen the machine that broke him and decided to dismantle it piece by piece. The next morning, I drove 3 hours south to the main office of Hollingsworth Medical Research. A clean glass building with manicured lawns and a flag that fluttered like it belonged to a different kind of country. I walked in with a clipboard and a borrowed badge that still smelled like the man I took it from, a temp who'd never show up again after his sick day. The receptionist didn't look twice at me. I knew the trick. Confidence is the best disguise. I moved through the halls like I belonged there, past labs, boardrooms, and walls covered in photos of success stories. Melissa's face smiled from 2 of them, framed, captioned, sanitized. "Brave survivor, inspiring hope for others." Every word of that caption was a lie. I found what I needed in a records room 2 floors down. It was quiet except for the soft hum of cooling fans. A terminal still logged in. I plugged in the flash drive. The folder opened immediately: files, ledgers, internal memos. A map of the entire operation. Galen Trust wasn't funding research. It was moving illegal trial money through fake patient accounts. Melissa's case was one of dozens, all married to a sponsor who unknowingly financed the fraud. I copied everything. My heart stayed steady, my breathing calm. I'd already stopped being the victim weeks ago. But before I could leave, a voice broke the silence. You shouldn't be here. It was Harrison. He looked worse than before. Thinner, eyes hollow, guilt carved into every line of his face. He told me he'd been waiting, that he knew I'd come eventually. He said he'd warned them I was smart enough to find the truth. I asked him why he helped her. He said it wasn't about her. It was about survival. Same as you. He stepped closer. You think you're different, Ethan? You just sell your life slower. He handed me another folder, sealed, heavy. Take this and leave. You don't want the rest. I didn't take it. I looked him in the eye and said I'd finish what he started. He just nodded, like he'd expected that answer. Then you'll end up like me, he said quietly. Haunted by a woman who never even loved you enough to lie properly. I walked out without looking back. But as I reached my truck, I realized something. The flash drive was still in the terminal. And by the time I turned to go back, the building's lights were already going dark. When the power cut, I froze. The lights inside the building flickered once, then went out completely. Through the glass lobby doors, I saw movement, shadows crossing between the hallways, fast and deliberate. Someone had triggered a lockdown. I made it to the truck before the alarm started, tires spinning on wet pavement as I pulled out of the lot. Behind me, the building glowed red in the rearview mirror, sirens cutting through the night. I didn't look back. Not once. An hour later, I was parked in an abandoned rest area off the interstate, the rain slamming against the windshield. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I didn't answer, but a message came through seconds later. You took something that wasn't yours. No name. Just those words. I checked the glove compartment, half expecting the flash drive to still be there, even though I knew it wasn't. My stomach tightened. Someone had gone back for it. Someone who wanted me to know. By morning, the news broke. Hollingsworth Medical's office had suffered a minor electrical fire. 2 employees missing. No mention of Harrison. No mention of me. I drove back to the motel and found my room door slightly open. Inside, everything looked untouched, except for the manila envelope I'd kept under the bed. It was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper. No words. Just a photograph. It was Melissa, sitting in a cafe somewhere sunny, laughing. Her hair longer, her face relaxed. Across from her, a man I didn't recognize. Maybe the real man she'd left me for. But what caught my eye wasn't them. It was the logo on the glass window behind them. Galen Trust. That's when it hit me. She wasn't hiding from the fallout. She was still part of it. I packed what little I had and checked out within minutes. Every decision now was about timing, not emotion. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not Harrison, not the police, not even the lawyer who still thought I was grieving. By sunset, I was on a flight to Phoenix. The metadata from one of Harrison's deleted files had led me there, to a new Galen Trust facility opening that week. Melissa was on the guest list under a new name, Melanie Crane. She'd built herself a new life out of the ashes of mine, and I was done watching from the smoke. Phoenix was dry, bright, and soulless. The kind of city where people reinvent themselves because no one bothers to ask who they were before. I rented a car under a different name and parked across from the Galen Trust building, a glass fortress dressed as a place of hope. From the outside, it looked like progress. Inside, it was just another machine running on other people's pain. The launch event was public. Cameras, press, banners with words like innovation, healing, and future. I stood among the crowd, a ghost in plain sight. She arrived 15 minutes late, stepping out of a black sedan like she'd been born for that spotlight. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect lie. She looked untouched by the years that had buried me. The announcer called her Melanie Crane, Director of Philanthropic Partnerships. The applause was polite, predictable. She smiled the same smile she'd worn in those fake hospital videos, calm and clean, like the world owed her a round of applause for surviving something she never had. I didn't move. I just watched, memorizing everything. The way she spoke, the way people leaned in when she laughed, the way she never looked uneasy. She believed she'd erased me. After the event, I followed from a distance as she headed to a rooftop reception. Security was tight, but I'd been invisible my entire life. I waited by the exit stairwell, hidden between service doors and catering carts. When she finally came down alone, still on her phone, I stepped out. For a second, she didn't recognize me. Then her face changed, just slightly, just enough. Not fear. Calculation. She said my name quietly, as if saying it might trigger something dangerous. Then, calm as ever, she told me I was making a mistake, that I didn't understand what I'd stumbled into. I told her I understood perfectly, that the cure she pretended to need had never been hers, that she'd sold her story for profit while I sold my life for her survival. She sighed, almost pitying. "Ethan," she said, "you think this was about money?" Then she leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "It was about selection. You were never the patient. You were the test." And before I could speak, two men stepped out from behind a corridor, each wearing the same black badge that said Security Division, Galen Trust. They moved fast, flanking her like trained instinct. I didn't resist, just raised my hands and stepped back. The hallway was quiet except for the low hum of the exit sign. She told them it was fine, that she'd handle it. One of them hesitated, but then she gave that same polished smile, and they obeyed. When the door closed behind them, she turned to me and said, "You shouldn't have come here." I said she'd stolen my life. She didn't argue. Instead, she walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. "You think they care about your money, Ethan?" she said. "They used it because it was clean, earned, traceable, ordinary. You were useful." Her calm was unbearable. I asked her what she meant when she called me the test. She finally looked back. "The research was never about curing cancer," she said. "It was about cellular resistance, seeing how far the body could endure extreme stress. Financial, emotional, psychological. Real survival. And you were the variable." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was too absurd. She said, "You lost everything. And you're still standing." That's what they needed to prove, that human endurance is the most profitable resource there is. I stepped closer. "You're saying you let me believe you were dying to see how I'd react." She didn't blink. "And you reacted exactly like they predicted." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then back at me. "They're watching this conversation," she said quietly. "You still have a chance to walk away. Do it." But her eyes told another story, something between warning and regret. I told her it was too late for that. Then I turned and walked toward the door. She didn't stop me, but as I reached the end of the corridor, she said something that froze me mid-step. "They won't let you keep the evidence, Ethan. And when they come, they won't ask questions." By the time I got back to my car, I could already see them, two black SUVs idling across the street, engines running, lights off. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, heart steady, watching them through the rain-smeared windshield. Melissa had been right about one thing. I had survived everything she'd done to me. The mistake was assuming that meant I was finished breaking. I drove until the city lights disappeared behind me. The desert swallowed the road, endless and silent. I didn't have a plan, not yet, but I knew one thing. They were tracking me. I'd seen enough of their systems at Hollingsworth to know how they operated. Quietly, surgically, erasing problems instead of solving them. By dawn, I pulled into a rundown gas station off the highway, used cash, and ditched my phone in a trash can behind the store. I bought an old flip phone from the clerk. No questions, no ID. It felt like holding a weapon made of time. Something they couldn't trace, at least for now. The first call I made was to Harrison. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. The second was to a contact I'd met years ago through a repair job, an IT contractor who once bragged about breaking federal firewalls for fun. He owed me a favor. I told him I needed a mirror server, something off-grid to dump encrypted files into. He asked why. I said I couldn't explain yet, but if anything happened to me, he'd understand when he saw the upload. He agreed, reluctantly. Money wasn't the motivator. Fear was. That night, I opened the folder Harrison had slipped me at Hollingsworth before the power went out. Inside were printed emails, timestamps, and signatures from the Galen Trust Board. People whose names carried weight in places I'd never reach. The emails detailed something called Project Threshold. The description was short: controlled stress trials. Objective: quantify behavioral thresholds of loyalty, despair, and recovery. I realized then that I wasn't just one experiment. There were others, families, patients, veterans, people like me who'd been pushed to the edge of ruin just to measure how far we could bend before breaking. I burned the papers after photographing them. Fire is the cleanest form of silence. At midnight, I checked into another motel, different town, same cheap smell. When I stepped into the room, the phone was already ringing. I answered without speaking. A familiar voice said, "You don't understand what you've done, Ethan." Melissa, calm, cold, unshaken. Then, before I could respond, she added, "You were never supposed to find the others." And the line went dead. For a long time, I just stood there, holding the phone to my ear even after the line went dead. Her voice still echoed through the static. Calm, measured, deliberate. The kind of voice that made you question what you'd really heard. I set the phone down and stared at the wall. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the faint drip from the bathroom faucet. You were never supposed to find the others. The words looped in my mind like a warning and a threat all at once. I spent the next 2 days digging. Using the fragments from Harrison's files, I cross-referenced locations, dates, trial numbers. It didn't take long before the pattern emerged. 15 participants. All connected cases. All labeled threshold assets. One name stood out. Case 07B. Rachel Anders. A woman whose husband had vanished after losing everything in a lawsuit against a medical supplier. I found her in Nevada, a small town built around a dying mine. When I arrived, she was working at a diner, older than the photo in the file, eyes tired but alert. When I told her my name, she didn't look surprised. She just said, "You too, huh?" We talked after her shift in the back parking lot. She told me she'd been followed for months after her husband's disappearance. Anonymous cars. Blocked numbers. Then one day, it stopped, right after she signed a non-disclosure agreement with a Galen Trust attorney. She said the money they offered her was hush money dressed as compassion. She'd taken it, but it didn't buy her silence forever. She opened her purse and handed me a folded letter, addressed to Harrison, postmarked 2 weeks before he vanished. It read, "They're shutting it down. Phase 3 failed. I'm next." By then, the wind had picked up, dust swirling across the parking lot. Rachel looked at me and said, "Whatever you think you're going to do, don't. They don't erase people because they're angry. They erase them because it's efficient." I told her maybe that's what they counted on. People like us staying quiet. She shook her head, sad and certain. "No, Ethan. They count on people like you wanting to make noise." I drove away at dawn. The desert opened wide around me, endless and merciless. I didn't know if I'd survive what came next. I just knew that silence had built their empire, and silence was exactly what I was going to destroy. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.